In addition to all of the accolades and accomplishments I noted earlier, Mr. Kielburger is also the co-author of 3 best-selling books. The most recent, Me to We, Finding Meaning in a Material World, debuted at number 5 on the New York Times bestsellers list. The recipient of a degree in Peace and Conflict Studies from the University of Toronto, as well as 2 honorary doctorates, Craig has appeared numerous times on the Oprah Winfrey Show, CNN, BBC, and virtually every media outlet one can think of. Not bad for someone who is just 24 years old. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly honored to welcome to our campus Mr. Craig Kielburger, co-founder of Free the Children.
Good morning. Provost Klanuski, President Mohler-Faria, thank you for the extraordinary welcome. My appreciation also to Brian Baldwin and John Winters, Pam Reed and Sue McComb for their kind support, and my deepest appreciation to Dr. Jonathan White, who is a member of the faculty here in addition to being a member of the board of directors of our organization, Free the Children, to whom I'm indebted for very kindly welcoming me into the Bridgewater State community. Graduates, it's an extraordinary honor and privilege to be able to join you in celebrating the accomplishments of Bridgewater State's College graduating class of 2007. Yes. Graduates, to be here today, you've survived years of work, long hours of research, countless exams, maybe a few all-nighters, maybe more than a few all-nighters. And through it all, you've challenged yourself and others, learned about the world, both inside and outside the classroom. You deserve to be incredibly proud, as do all those around you here today who made it possible for you to be here through their support and through their encouragement, parents, teachers, members of the faculty, mentors, friends. Graduates, please take a moment and just look at all the individuals who have gathered into the corners of this room here today. They deserve our support, they deserve our encouragement, and most importantly, they deserve our appreciation. Please join me in recognizing your parents and friends with a round of applause. It's a true honor to join so many honored guests here today, members of the faculty, family, friends, in celebrating your accomplishments. As members of Bridgewater's graduating class, you leave here with an extraordinary accomplishment to your credit. You've reached a level of learning that most people in this world will never attain, and most people will never have the opportunity to enjoy. Today in our world, 130 million children between 5 and 11 years of age have never once stepped foot into a classroom. 2/3 of them are girls. A college education is a truly rare and a precious thing. And as you come together today to recognize and to thank all those who made it possible for you to be here today, I ask you to also remember those who are not fortunate to have the opportunities available to all of us. As President Mohler-Faria shared with you, I've had the opportunity to travel and to work in the field of human rights with children around the world, many of whom have never received an education, many of whom would be their greatest dream. Kids in countries like in the Philippines, working in the garbage dumps outside of Manila, the capital. There I met an 8-year-old boy whose name is Jeffrey. And when I met him, I asked him a question I ask most children who I have the chance to meet, and I asked him if he had ever been to school. And he looked at me confused with this question, and then he looked up to his father, who was working right next to him in the garbage dump, and he asked his father, "What is school?" Because in his 8 years, he had never once stepped foot into a classroom, but he had never even left the garbage dump. It was where he was born, where he worked every single day of his life. Or as recently in rural communities in India, and we met families that were so desperately poor they were forced to sell their own children into bonded labor, into modern slavery. And there we met a father who explained that a middleman came to the village and promised to take his child away for 1 year in exchange for a sum of money, and showed the father a contract. The father couldn't read it. He couldn't even sign his own name to it. So he took his thumb and he rolled his thumb in ink and he put his thumbprint at the bottom of the page. And that was the equivalent of a signature, if you can't read or write. And he said a year later he went back to that factory and he pounded on the door asking for his child to be returned. And he said the factory owner laughed at him and said he didn't read the contract properly and that it didn't say 1 year, but it said 10 years. And there's no country in this world where slavery is legal, not in India or Sudan that has the highest number of slaves today. There's no country, but if you've never had an education, if you can't read or write, if you don't know your most basic rights, well, then it's so easy to be exploited. Or in Brazil, in the Philippines, or Thailand, Kenya. I remember in Brazil, we spent time with children working in the sugarcane fields and the mines instead of in the classroom. Or in Pakistan, kids who were working paying off debts taken by their parents or even their grandparents. Or Sierra Leone, West Africa, that went through a brutal civil war where 30,000 children were forced to fight as child soldiers. The rebels, a group called the Revolutionary United Front, they would recruit by burning schools to the ground and executing teachers. I grew up far away from all that. I grew up in the suburbs, in a city in Canada. My parents were school teachers in a very traditional middle-class upbringing. But when I was 12 years old and I was looking for the comics in the local paper, I saw a news story about a young boy from Pakistan, a child slave. He was sold into bondage when he was 4 years old. At the age of 10, he escaped and started traveling the world, speaking out against child labor, even coming to Boston, Massachusetts, where he stood in front of elementary and high school students, showing his scars, telling the truth about slavery in our world. And at the age of 12, he returned to Pakistan, where he was riding his bicycle in front of his home and he was shot dead. He was assassinated at the age of 12. After reading that article, I went to my grade 7 classmates. We started a small group. We called it Free the Children, of young people helping others. Many said, wait until you finish school, until you get a good job, until you reach a position of influence. We did not want to wait. We wanted to help now. And from that vision, that group of grade 7 students, as you heard today, we built more than 450 schools around the world, 20,000 women's cooperatives, medical programs for 500,000 people. We work with about 1 million children in developing countries. And although we're the ones who build the schools, it's the children who have actually taught us the most. I remember being in Thailand and we were walking down the street and there was a young street girl who called out to us and she would cup her hand and she touched her lips. It's a symbol in developing countries when someone's hungry. And so one of the young members handed an orange to this girl. And we kept walking. And we stopped and we looked back at her. And we saw her holding that orange and she started to literally tear into it. I could tell she was so hungry just how she was looking at it. And as she was peeling it and tearing it apart, she stopped and she looked at all the other kids who were also on the street who were staring at her and saw that they were also hungry. And so she took that orange and she started to break it and divide it into tiny pieces until she shared an equal amount with all the other kids on the street. And in that one moment, she taught us more about compassion and sharing and life than we'd ever learned in a classroom. We live in a world today where last year we spent $18 billion on cosmetics, makeup. That's about what it would take to eliminate the worst forms of hunger and malnutrition in our world. We spent $11 billion just in Europe on ice cream, when all it would take is $10 billion to provide antiviral drugs and AIDS education to the world's population. We spent $40 billion playing golf every year, when it to provide universal literacy to every person, those most basic right of an education, to read and write, would cost an additional $5 billion. And I believe every generation has a challenge thrust upon it. It was 200 years ago to this year that they fought and won in the British Parliament the abolition of the slave trade across the Atlantic. We've seen fights on civil rights, on women's empowerment, against apartheid in South Africa. The question is whether our generation is willing to rise up to the challenge set before us. Because for the first time in human history, we have the means and the ability to end the worst forms of poverty. That back-breaking, crippling poverty that affects 1.1 billion people in our world, 1.1 billion people who survive on less than $1 a day, most of them women and children. And so graduates, like that young girl on the streets in Thailand, will you look around you, from the local to the global? Will you open your eyes and open your heart and share the gift that you have? You know, as you leave here today with that college degree in your hand, we ask you to think not only about what it can do for you, but what you can do for others. It's easy to get caught up in the rush once you leave this tent, the rush of job, of career, of success, of advancement. You know, as we rush ahead, I'm reminded of a study that was conducted on a college campus very much like this one, back in 1973. They took a group of students and they told them they had to rush from one end of campus to the other. And as part of this psych experiment, they had to walk past a person who was disheveled, looked injured on the side of the street, almost calling out for help. In one version of the study, they had to pass through an alley that was so narrow they almost had to step over this person. Fewer than 10% of people stopped to help. The study was called From Jerusalem to Jericho. And it was given its name because the participants in that study were all theology students. And they were rushing to go deliver a sermon on the Good Samaritan. Today we ask you to take a moment and to pause, to really think about what type of life do you want to lead. How will you define success? Is it the type of car you drive? The size of your bank account? It's very easy to finish college and to forget everything you learned here except the simple equation MBA equals BMW. But I think success is something more than that, something more meaningful, more lasting. I think it's leaving a legacy. And when I say a legacy, I don't mean having a street named after you or starting a company with your initials on it. If you can remember history's kings and queens, statues crumble, even pyramids get covered by the sand at times. But a legacy, a true legacy, is a living one. Every time a person of color sits at the front of a bus, we see the legacy of Rosa Parks. Every time a woman casts a ballot, we see the legacy of Susan B. Anthony. That is a true legacy. If you've been important in the life of a child, you've left a legacy. If you brought meaning, purpose, and joy to your family, you've left a legacy. Think about it. Nelson Mandela's mother left an amazing legacy. Martin Luther King's father left an amazing legacy. Ultimately, we're remembered for how we used our gifts and talents to reach out to others. There are a group of students here today who have chosen to symbolize this commitment through a pledge that they're making. I was told there are a group of students here today who decided to join in the graduation pledge, which is a promise taken by tens of thousands of students in dozens of campuses across Canada and the United States, and at the heart and soul of it, it's a promise to think about the social and environmental impact as they move forward in their careers. Whether you've already chosen to make this pledge or whether you're hearing it for the first time, I ask you to please remember these words. Because the graduation pledge reads, I pledge to explore and take into account the social and environmental consequences of any job I consider, and will try to improve these aspects of any organization for which I work. And I want to challenge Bridgewater State College to also take that pledge, to also build on an extraordinary legacy of service and community. And I want to challenge to consider an idea to become the first state college, to my knowledge, anywhere in the United States, to bring in a mandatory community service requirement for graduates. In my home province in Ontario, every single high school student has to complete 40 hours of community service, somehow giving back to the community before they can receive their diploma. So that when students walk across the stage, they know they are accepting something not only from a place of higher learning, but also of higher values. And this builds on an extraordinary legacy that Bridgewater State has already created and is already leading the way, from bringing community service for programs like Martin Luther King Day of Service that countless students were part of, helping from cradles to crayons with inner city kids, or the Boston Rescue Mission, a homeless shelter, Good Neighbors Day, reaching out to the local community, the Sustainability Center, helping the campus become more green. I want to challenge the faculty to bring this message to students through service learning programs, joining courses that already do that, from the biology of fresh water, social psychology, perspectives on the Holocaust, literary assessment principles and techniques. The list goes on, of teachers and faculty members who are already matching meaningful community service with instruction. And from the local to the global, to see more students sharing their gifts, given the opportunities, the scholarships, the means to go spend time overseas in developing countries, sharing the gifts that they've been given here at Bridgewater. So for example, the art and music students with us here today, to open the eyes of a child to love of culture, sciences working for cures for disease, political science, social work, criminal justice, seeking greater equality and social justice in our world. This builds on the Take a Break and Make a Difference alternative spring break program already run out of this extraordinary institution. Because students go to serve, but it's their life that's forever changed. I want to leave with you a story from a time that I had the honor to spend some service work overseas, volunteering in Brazil on the coast with street kids. And they were an amazing group of kids. They ranged in age from the youngest, who was about 7 or 8 years old, to the oldest, who was about 16. And that was it. That was their family. That's how they took care of each other. They showed me where they lived. It was a bus shelter. And they explained how at night they would scavenge. They would find loose pieces of cardboard, a newspaper, whatever they could find to stay warm at night. And one of the kids asked me if I wanted to play a game of soccer, or as they call it in Brazil, football. I said I'd love to. And the street kid, he started to dash and started to literally start just looking all around the ground, searching for anything that he could find. And eventually he picked up this loose, plastic water bottle. Someone had just thrown away. It was broken. He started waving it back and forth, and he came running up at us. And he was so excited as he was waving it, saying, "We have our soccer ball. We can now play." Because the street child had never played with a real soccer ball in his life. And eventually night came, and I had to say goodbye to this group of street kids. I was leaving the next day, and the leader of the group, he was a 14-year-old boy named Jose. And he said before I left, he wanted to give me something to remember these kids by. Remember his family by was the word he used. And he said this, but he stopped for a long time, and he was looking, and I could tell he was thinking about what he could give, because a street child has almost nothing. And then he smiled, and he took off his shirt. It was a soccer jersey, he had told me earlier. It was from his favorite soccer team. And he folded it and he just held it out in his hands. And he didn't say a word. And I kept trying to somehow politely decline, saying that I can't accept that this was his only shirt, that he'd be cold tonight. I was trying to somehow say no. But he stood there and he just held it in his hands, and he was so proud at the idea that he had something that he could actually give. And so I did the only thing I could. I took off my t-shirt and I folded it and I held it out in return. And we ended up exchanging shirts that day. And I still have that shirt. It's framed. It's hanging on my wall. It'll go right next to that plaque to remind me of that group of street kids, but especially to remind me of the compassion and the lesson about sharing they taught me that day. As I leave you, I want to leave you with the words of one of my great heroes, an extraordinary woman who had the honor to work and to spend time with, Mother Teresa. She once said, in our lives we can do no great things, but we can do small things with great love. And so to Bridgewater State, graduating class of 2007, congratulations on your accomplishments and your new opportunities to take action, however small, but with great love, and to truly change the world. Thank you.